What is going on, guys? It is MurderInc here, back with another Raid Shadow Legends video. Today we're going to be talking about the Doom Tower bosses, the information we have on them, what champions you should be looking for if you have them, how to counteract all of these different encounters. There's a lot of cool stuff coming up, and I think that some people may already know the overview of what the Doom Tower bosses actually do. However, there's a lot of detail in it, and I spent quite some time going through them all, looking for the perfect champions to counter it, so you guys are ready. As soon as you enter the Doom Tower, you don't have to do theory crafting yourself. While I do encourage it, I'm going to kind of give you the guidelines on how to be successful when approaching this content. Now, one thing I do have to say, as always, is going to be all of this information is going to be subject to change until literally the day before Doom Tower comes out. However, there's a lot of information indicating that this is going to be very, very close to the final state. There may be some tuning after this all is released. However, as far as right now, this is looking to hold pretty firm all the way up until the Doom Tower. However, I do have to stress the point that all of this is subject to change. Now, with all of that being said, let's get straight into the document that I made. And first, we're going to go over the 4 Doom Tower bosses: the Scarab King, Magma Dragon, Frost Spider, and Nether Spider. A lot of cool names, really hyped about it. At first, we have Agrath the Nether Spider, and Venom Strand being the first ability, attacks all enemies, places 5% poisons for 4 turns, repeats this attack for each spiderling without buffs on them, cannot be resisted or blocked. Then we have Brood Feast, spawns 4 spiderlings, then puts counterattack on them for 3 turns, attacks all enemies with spiderlings if at least 1 is spawned, maximum 4 alive. Now we have a passive Elder Lurker, counterattacks when enemies decrease Agrath turn meter, damage is equivalent to the lost turn meter. The second passive we have is Tide of Toxins, attacks all enemies at the start of each turn, combust poisons, increased debuff duration when attacked, then place weaken. So that's what we have for Agrath. Now let's go into the, adds that he has, which are the Agrath Spiderlings, attacks all enemies, places a 5% poison for 2 turns, cannot be resisted or blocked, heals Agrath by 10% for each time a Spiderling counterattacks, places an ally protect on Agrath whenever counterattack is removed or expired. Ally protect cannot be removed. So tons of really cool mechanics here. Finally, something that's going to make this game interesting and definitely difficult. I had to spend more time on this champion, I think, than the other ones. Not this champion, I mean this boss. And I found a few ways that you can actually do really well against this, but I'm excited to see how it plays off when it goes live. So the first thing I want to talk about is the high priority champion skills. That's going to be block buff, cleanse, remove debuff, turn meter reduction, remove buff, HP burn, block heal, and ally protection. Now let me just explain that in case some of you don't understand. So what block buff is going to do is it's going to ensure that as soon as these spiderlings come out, if you do get the next turn with your champions, you're going to be able to provide that block buff on all of the enemies in the area, as we can see. So there's going to be 4 spiderlings plus Agrath. You're going to put block buff on. There's going to be no counter attack. There's going to be no ally protect that cannot be removed. However, what does this do? This triggers the A1, repeats the attack for each spiderling without buffs. So he's going to be placing 5% poisons on all of your champions, who's going to place 5 poisons for 4 turns on all of your champions every time he gets an attack. Now, this is a core thing you can be looking for, but it's going to require a certain team, which is why I have people like Lissandra, other turn meter reduction champions in this as well. So cleanse, remove, buff. This is going to be very important because poisons are constantly going to be applied to your team, and all you've seen on this sheet so far is cannot be resisted or blocked, cannot be resisted or blocked. So block debuff isn't going to be as strong. Someone with some type of cleanse mechanic is going to do very strong against this boss. Now, as mentioned, if you don't have access to something like a block buff, you can use remove buff, which would remove the counter attack from the spiderlings, which would then provide ally protect on those spiderlings. Now, for those of you who don't know, the perfect way to counteract any champion or event with an ally protect is actually going to be HP burn. If you calculate the damage HP burn does when one champion gets a turn and gets hit and burns every single other champion, like most people see in the Spider Dungeon. This does a really good job to counteract an ally protection buff that's sharing all of the total damage, and keeping in mind that Spiderlings will have significantly less health than Agrath the boss. So even if you are hitting the main boss, the Spiderling is going to take damage and it is eventually going to die. What HP burn does, it just lowers that threshold and makes them die much quicker. Now another thing you can do if you don't have a way to strip the buffs, you can use the skill block heal on Agrath. Allow those counterattacks to go off. Granted, you can't actually survive them, and that's all you'll need for this. So that's definitely an option as well. And finally, we have ally protection. The reason why I have ally protection here and I have these asterisks next to them is because ally protection, strength, and defense up, all of these will work very well based on how much turn reduction you're actually going to do. As we can see here, counterattacks when enemy decreases Agrath's turn meter equal to lost turn meter. So someone like Lissandra is going to be strong in this situation if you have the means to actually kill this boss in a reasonable time period, because she's going to reduce the turn meter first with the A3 before fully depleting it with the A2. This is going to make sure your Lissandra isn't going to get one shot by simply opening up with her A2 on the Agrath boss itself. So this is probably going to be manual for most people as far as the encounter goes. Now let's go over the MVP champions. Doom Priest, you're going to see Doom Priest's name a lot in this video. Doom Priest is, in my opinion, one of the most underappreciated champions in this entire game, with the ability to cleanse one random debuff at the start of her turn, putting her in something like Relentless Gear, giving her lots of speed. She is going to be such a big asset for you. If you have her, I highly recommend getting her to 60, making her fast, defensive, Relentless Gear, anything you can, because she is going to be absolutely crucial, not just to this boss, but to some of the upcoming bosses that I'm going to explain as well. Finally, we have Lissandra. I briefly talked about it a few moments ago, where we have the initial push down in turn meter on everyone, Agrath as well as the Spiderlings. She also has that full depletion of the turn meter on the A2. And one really cool thing is she's going to reflect all of the poisons that are on herself back to whatever target she's hitting. And the fact that this boss is just loading her team up with poisons is going to be very strong, since she can actually reflect that. So she's going to be a support champion doing damage equivalent to a damage dealing champion based on how many poisons are actually going out onto your team. Next, we have Gerptuk Mossbeard. He is that block debuff. He can fully cleanse a target, so there's a lot of synergy there. He does increase the damage your team does, so if you're kind of in like a race to the finish team where you're trying to do as much damage as possible before this boss actually does kill you, Gerptuk's damage bonus that he applies for the rest of your teams can definitely be extremely strong here. Next, we have Cethalia. Everyone knows Cethalia pushes down the turn meter, boosts your team's turn meter, has the ability to cleanse abilities, put on that block debuff, although it's not going to do much against this boss. So she's definitely going to be very strong as well. She has awesome base speed, decently tanky champion, so there's a lot of benefit there. Finally, we have Ignatius here. Now, for those of you who don't know, Ignatius is definitely the best HP burn champion in the game, as it's not resistible unless it is a weak hit. Now, there is still no word on the affinity of these champions. I would assume it's going to be Void. I could definitely be wrong there. However, for now, since I haven't seen any information on it, I'm going to assume it's Void. So Ignatius, he also has that AoE Provoke to make sure the enemy is using their A1 abilities. On Ignatius, he also has a stun on the A1, which is going to be very strong if he does decide to hit those Spiderlings with the A1 and you put a counter attack on your team. He can just be constantly CCing all of the Spiderlings. So lots of potential with Ignatius, which is why I have him as an MVP champion. Now, this is what I'm excited to talk about. I have Maneater here. Now, in theory, even though I haven't been able to see this boss live, in theory, you can build an unkillable team to fully auto this boss and not worry about anything. In theory, the block debuff unkillable, the turn meter reduction Maneater has on his A2 will be enough to give enough turns to keep your entire team alive, since they have no way of stripping any buffs from your team. Now, this is going to be very cool and a really interesting idea. I'm not sure if I'm going to pursue this initially right away. It's definitely something I'm going to revisit after I probably clear it for the first time. However, the first thing that came to my mind is if you were running the 2-to-1 ratio Bat Eater team with 2 Man-Eaters and a Painkeeper, it's very possible that 5-man team can also solo this boss alone. So that's probably one thing I'm most excited about testing for Agrath. Moving on to our second boss here, we have Kodath the Magma Dragon. Brand with weakness, the first attack attacks one enemy, decreases turn meter by 50%, will target enemies under Hex. As we know, Hex is the debuff that the Minotaur does apply to your team. Next we have Overburn Attacks all enemies, instantly activates HP burn and decreases duration by 1. Stoke the Flames attack all enemies, places HP burn for 3 turns, then steals 10% of the turn meter from enemies under HP burn, places a Hex debuff on the lowest HP, cannot be resisted or blocked. So really cool. I like the synergy with how it's constantly slamming your team with that Hex debuff. First passive here, Lethal Lava, places Hex debuff on one enemy whenever they have a Hex debuff removed. So pretty much you're not removing this, it's going to stay on your team. What you have to do is figure out how to get around this Hex debuff because it's definitely very strong. Next we have a passive, Ignore block damage, shield unkillable and 100% defense for enemies under Hex. Huge. Remove HP burn from Dragon and replace with continuous heal. The next and final passive, Molten Dragon immunity, excluding provoke. Bingo. Excluding provoke. So with that being said, lots of cool things. High priority champion skills for this boss. Provoke, block debuff, cleanse or resist them team leader, and remove buff. So now let's take a moment to think about what I just said there. Provoke, since it says excluding provoke, this is the only form of CC you can actually do on this dragon, so it's going to be very strong. Someone like a War Chief has probably the best provoke in the game. You can also look at someone like Angar, who also applies provoke and reflect damage, so he does offer a little bit more damage. However, as far as the longest lasting provoke goes, I would definitely have to say it is going to be War Chief. You can definitely use someone like an Umbral Enchantress as well, but we will go over the MVP champions a little bit in just one moment. The next thing we have here is in fact block debuff. This isn't for the Hex, as it says here, Hex cannot be resisted or blocked. Finally, you have a cleanse, in case you don't have that block debuff, to keep getting rid of that HP burn on yourself. And then remove buff, once again, that is to remove the HP burn conversion to a heal onto the boss if that is a strategy you are going with. So now this boss does not seem too difficult, I'm going to be honest with you. This is a boss where, yes, you have a very worrisome Hex debuff. However, this is where a buff like Strengthen really comes into effect. Someone like a Duchess really comes in handy here, as well as ally protection. It will ignore 100% of defense if you are under this Hex debuff. However, as I've said many times before, Strengthen does not affect your defense at all. All it does is mitigate incoming damage. The same with the Stalwart gear set, the HP burn effect from someone like a Tyrant, which is probably why they added that iteration of we'll swap HP burn on the boss into a continuous heal. And then finally, a mastery like Bulwark, splitting damage among your team, making sure you're not getting one shot. However, we don't know how hard these abilities are hitting. We don't know if the single target hit from Brand the Weakness is going to hit very hard. We don't know if the 2 AoE attacks are going to hit very hard. So while there is going to be a Hex debuff placed on your team, we're not sure what's going to warrant a one-shot based on his kit. So who did I pick for my MVP champions? I do have Umbral Enchantress with the chance to provoke. Obviously, if the champion is provoked, he's only going to use his A1 ability. He's not going to be using any of his special abilities, so only his A1 and his passive will be active while he is provoked. We have Duchess here providing a revive. Revive is going to be very important for this boss. If Hex debuff is in fact getting out, your teammates are getting one shot. They have to be quickly revived by any reviver. Duchess is strong, but she also provides your team with damage reduction on top of things. Once again, we have Doom Priest cleansing those HP burn debuffs on your team. Cethalia, another thing like the last boss of Agrath, where she does the same thing. She does push down the turn meter We have Madame Ceres, who overall purpose can get rid of that continuous heal, also places that defense down and attack down on the target, which can be very strong. And finally, we have someone like Sifi, who overall just applies the defense up, block debuff, giving your chance a much better time when facing this boss and how to have continued success going forward. As mentioned, there are obviously tons of better champions, rare champions, epic champions. However, these are just the MVP picks that I personally picked, who have kits that definitely highlight the best of what they can do against a champion like this. Now, the next boss we're going to talk about is Borgoth, the Scarab King. The first ability being Madness Fog, attacks all enemies, places decreased attack and speed, extra hit on enemies with no shield, extra hit places provoke. Then we have Vile Absorption, attacks all enemies, places extra hit for each buff, each hit steals one random buff if no shield, or removes one buff if shielded, places True Fear if no buffs are stolen, or Fear if no buffs removed. Moving on to the first passive, Spectral Horror. Decreases damage received according to how much max HP has been increased. Damage received is 90% if it's decreased by 10%, 60 if 10 to 20, 30 if 20 to 30, and 0 if more than 30. Now this is where it's quite confusing. I'm still not sure to this point how I'm supposed to interpret this. And so damage received is 90% if max HP decrease is less than 10%. Now, what this says to me is he's going to have lot of health, which means it's going to be almost impossible to reach 30% decreased health. So how I read this is he will do 90% of his normal damage if it's decreased by less than 10%. He will deal 60% of his normal damage if it's decreased by 10 to 20. He will do 30% of his decreased damage if it's 20 to 30, and he will literally do 0 damage to you if you have decreased his max health by more than 30. So what that says to me is it's going to be damn near impossible to actually reduce his health to over 30%. Maybe there are going to be some teams with full destroy gear, probably not going to be the most optimal. However, we'll kind of see how this plays out once it goes live. Next, we have the final passive, Easy Prey, counterattacks when attacked by an enemy with no shield. As we've definitely heard 3 or 4 times already, you're going to need a shield here. Whether it's a shield set to start the match, and from there you can use your other champions to have proper synergy, reducing the turn meter, whatever you have to do to take this boss down. However, a shield is going to be required because he's going to be a nightmare if you don't have a shield at your disposal. So high priority champion skills, a champion that provides a shield, someone with the shield set just to get you rolling, maybe extending the buff overall, someone with a block debuff, and finally a max HP reduction champion. And this is kind of to be determined because we don't know how much damage this champion is actually going to be doing, so you might not need to take advantage of decreasing the enemy's max health at all for that matter. So MVP champions, as you can probably assume, Sir Nicholas, Santa Claus, he's going to be very strong for this. Miscreated Monster also providing that shield. Duchess, Revive champion, block debuff champion, which is going to be very strong with those True Fear and Fear. Also the fact that buffs are getting removed, so you definitely want more than just 1 or 2 buffs. You kind of want to be spreading yourself so you have tons of buffs on. The boss is going to have an RNG system with which buff is actually being removed here to give you the highest chance of success. Now we have Chris here, kind of a champion of all, where he has tons of buffs. He's going to start out giving you an awesome shield to start with. Flesh Tears, someone that can be very strong with increasing the duration of buffs as well as increasing the duration of debuffs. You can also use someone like a Sandlash Survivor. They will definitely be equally as viable. And as far as the decreasing enemy max health, you can definitely go through those champions. You can use a Destroy set or use someone like Anithwe, Rhodos, the champion Ripper, who definitely hasn't seen a lot of gameplay, but those are definitely your options. Like I said, in my opinion, this boss is going to have an absurd amount of health, which is why they're actually giving it the actual tooltip of 0% damage taken if reduced by more than 30%, meaning that it's going to be very unrealistic over 30% max health to actually be reduced. So overall, this is a very hard champion to gauge. We don't know how hard he hits, we don't know how fast he is, so all I can really give you is those thoughts so far kind of get the wheel turning in your guys' heads, maybe you have some additional information and thoughts on this that I wasn't able to come up with while I was going over Borgoth, the Scarab King, when I did this. So definitely drop a comment, let me know what you think. But I really do think we're gonna have to see him live, test him out first to see what the best way to approach this guy is, based on how his decreasing max health is going to actually interfere with what we're trying to do. Now for our final boss today, we have Soroth the Frost Spider. The first attack being a whiteout, attacks all enemies, places decreased accuracy. Next we have Katabic Winds, attacks all enemies, places block buffs and heal reduction on frozen enemies, places decreased speed and decreased attack on non-frozen enemies. Absolute Zero moves all buffs from enemies, then attacks and places freeze with 100% chance reduced to 50% if Soroth is under HP burn, fills turn meter by 20% for freezes placed. Next we have the first passive, Frozen Lymph. When attack has a 20% chance to freeze, increases defense and resist if not under HP burn. You can kind of see the trend here, HP burn is going to be required. Purge by Flame revives Soroth with 50% HP, full turn meter, and skills reset if killed while not under HP burn. Also spawns 2 spiderlings, max 2. There's a lot here. When I read this the first time, an idea shot into my head to say there's one way to make this really easy. We'll go over that in just a moment. So now we have Soroth Spiderlings. Removes all debuffs from Soroth, instantly transfers decreased defense and weaken to this Spiderling if not under leech. Will convert debuffs to weaker versions on transfer. So this is a really cool mechanic. They're making sure you're killing the Spiderlings, because if HP burn isn't on the target, you're in for a nightmare. There's no other way to put it. You're going to get frozen over and over again unless high priority champion skills. HP burn, as I already said, going to be required. Resistance aura and resistance team. As it currently stands, you need about 300 to 350 resistance on your champions to successfully resist all of the debuffs incoming at you for stage 20 dungeons. Now, if this stays true, this is going to be incredibly strong for this boss. You won't need block debuff. You won't need anything like that. The decreased accuracy isn't going to land on you. You're not going to get frozen. You're not going to get your speed reduced. All you're going to need is resistance for this boss, and it's going to make your life so much easier. Now, you can say, why not just use block debuff like I just mentioned? You can do that, however, you're really taking a risk here. If you're not extending your buffs, you're going to have to speed tune it perfectly to make sure it never wears off. As soon as it wears off once, you're going to get frozen and you can get into a very unlucky CC chain with your champions. You can also run a champion that removes debuffs from your team. However, this guy, honestly, he has so much CC, he's coming at you every single turn with a very threatening debuff. And unless you're using someone like a Doom Priest, once again, it's going to be very difficult to get around this. So what I'm probably going to do is just run resistance to make sure none of these are landing. I'm not going to have to worry about it at all. Resistance chest piece, resistance in the Great Hall, and the resistance banner is going to be more than enough to cover me for what I'm trying to do here. And finally, AoE CC. In my opinion, this is going to be very, very strong for the Spiderlings, because I never want to assume in new content that I'm going to be one-shotting everything as soon as they come out. If I can do that, I'm going to be pleasantly surprised. However, I am going to be planning for the worst possible case scenario, that I'm not going to be able to one-shot or two-shot these Spiderlings. They're going to be consistently threatening my team by removing HP burn from the boss. I'm not looking forward to that, so AoE CC is going to be a very paramount part of this boss. Now, the MVP champions that I personally picked are Lydia, for the strong synergy with champions in case someone does get frozen. Now, the reason why I put Lydia here is I had considered running a team with one champion with very low resistance. What that does is Lydia has a solid amount of CC on her A1, and with the rest of her kits also providing that strengthen buff on the entire team as well as increased speed. So the fact that every time my low resist champion gets resisted, she's going to be A1ing the boss for that additional damage, maybe perhaps with War Master, is definitely going to overall serve a solid benefit to my team personally, which is the reason why I put her as an MVP champion there, because as we all know, she does have the defense down and weaken that she does apply to all of the enemies on the map. Next we have Razon. We have an awesome resistance aura. We have an A3 that reduces the turn meter of every single champion. He also hits very hard and is a giant slayer, so he can be doing tons of damage to the boss as well. Next we have Duchess, who's going to, if you choose to go this route, provide damage reduction for your team, prevent your team from getting frozen. You will have to speed tune her like I mentioned before, and she also has that revive, so that's why she's an MVP. Lissandra, once again, turn meter altering in battles like this, high stress, lots of CC coming at you. Lissandra, in my opinion, is one of the most threatening champions as far as turn meter manipulation, which is why I have her in this list as well as an MVP champion. Next we have Ignatius. Obviously you already know, irresistible HP burn, so it's always going to land on every single target that's currently in front of you. He also has an AoE provoke that does require accuracy. However, this can be very strong since I did say AoE CC is high priority champion skill already. Provoking those spiders, not letting them remove debuffs from Soroth, giving him time to cycle through so his HP burn is currently active again, just in case a spider does get free from a provoke. Next we have Ultimate Gallic. Tyrant Ixthamor, also providing the HP burn. Ultimate Gallic I have in here because he is an AoE, although it's not 100%, but he is one of the few that can actually apply that, so I thought it was worthy of mentioning him as an MVP champion. And then finally we have Cethalia at the end, doing all of the good things, cleansing our frozen target if I do choose to use someone like Lydia, Cethalia, and someone to get frozen. I can just simply cleanse that frozen target right away after Lydia's already gotten her bonus attack in from actually being CC'd. So guys, that is my recap. Let me know what you think. There's a lot of really cool things here. I definitely didn't cover everything, and that was kind of the point. As much as I wanted to spend 5 or 6 hours going through this, I kind of wanted to briefly go over it, give you my thoughts, give you my analytical breakdown, and kind of fish for ideas from you guys. What are you guys thinking? What champions are you thinking about? Who are you getting ready? Like I said, this is definitely not officially the final build for these bosses. However, this is pretty sturdy as far as what we're going to expect to see. If it's not exactly like this, it's going to be very similar to the mechanics we're actually going to be seeing at launch. So as always guys, if you like this content, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and I will see you all in my next upload.